What the hell is going on here? I snarled, slamming the bank statements down on the kitchen counter. The numbers stared back accusingly, thousands of dollars drained from my personal account over the past few months. Clay glanced up from his laptop, his chiseled jaw tightening. What are you ranting about now, Arya? I could hear the dismissive tone laced with irritation. Don't play dumb with me. Nearly 10 grand has disappeared from my savings account, and I want to know where it went. He scoffed, shaking his head as if I was overreacting. You're being ridiculous. It's our money. Doesn't matter whose account it's in. My blood boiled at his arrogant indifference. We'd had this circular argument too many times. That's my personal savings I've built up over years, Clay. My money from marketing clients and investments. You can't just drain it whenever you want. I had some extra expenses to cover for the team, that's all. Clay shrugged nonchalantly before returning his gaze to the laptop screen. No need to make a federal case out of it. I opened my mouth but quickly clamped it shut. Reasoning with him was futile when he got this cavalier. Something dark twisted in the pit of my stomach, an instinct I could no longer ignore. Look at me. My voice was quieter but laced with steel. Clay's eyes flicked up, finally registering my simmering anger. What? I'm not buying your excuses anymore, not this time. I leaned forward, gripping the counter's edge until my knuckles turned white. You're lying to me about something, and I'm going to find out what it is. A humorless laugh escaped his lips as he rose from his chair. You're being paranoid, babe. The company's doing great, and your dad's business is more successful than ever. There was that smug, placating tone again, the one designed to make me doubt myself and back down. Not this time. In a few strides I was nose to nose with Clay, no kitchen counter between us. Don't you dare bring my family into this. If you've done anything to jeopardize their company. His features hardened, and he grabbed my wrist, his grip just shy of bruising. You listen to me. I've given you a life most women only dream about, a nice home, vacations, financial security. Stop acting like an ungrateful, hysterical shrew and leave the money talk to me. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. That arrogant sneer and his dismissive words ignited something within me, a simmering rage I'd suppressed for too long. In that moment, the carefully constructed facade of our marriage began to splinter. His fingers dug painfully into my skin as he leaned closer. This jealousy and distrust doesn't look good on you, Arya. Now, why don't you go take a hot bath and let me worry about the finances like a good little wife? That was the final condescending blow I could take. With a strength born of pure fury, I wrenched my arm free from his grasp. You narcissistic bastard. Our marriage is one big financial lie. Well, I'm done being one of your blind little lambs. Clay's eyes widened slightly at my vehemence, but I didn't stick around to hear his pitiful excuses and insults. I spun on my heel and stormed out, the slam of the front door being the final punctuation on our fractured charade. The truth was out there somewhere, and nothing was going to stop me from finding it and bringing Clay's deceit into the scorching light. The next morning, I strode into Westbrook Marketing, feeling clear-headed for the first time in months. Clay had already left for the office, which was probably for the best. I needed time to think through my next moves without his toxic presence clouding my judgment. Everything okay? Dean, one of the top data analysts, peered at me with a concerned frown as I settled at my desk. I forced a tight smile, keenly aware that the entire office had likely overheard my explosive fight with Clay yesterday. Just a minor disagreement with my husband, but I'm fine, really. Dean didn't seem convinced but gave a hesitant nod before returning to his work. I exhaled slowly, grateful that he didn't press further. I could sort through my marital problems on my own, starting by getting to the bottom of Clay's shady financial dealings. By lunchtime, I'd already dug up bank statements for the past year and created a meticulously detailed spreadsheet tracking where every cent of my savings and earnings had gone. The numbers told a disturbing story of frequent large withdrawals that Clay hadn't accounted for. He really is hemorrhaging your finances. A familiar voice made me jump. Lena stood over my shoulder, eyes narrowed at the incriminating spreadsheet. Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. Your door was open. I quickly waved her inside, relief flooding me that my oldest friend was here. Lena, I'm so glad you stopped by. Clay's been up to something underhanded for a while now, and I need your help nailing down what it is. She settled into the chair across from me, jaw set in a determined line. You know I've got your back, no matter what. Just tell me everything. Over the next hour, I recounted every sketchy comment and strange financial discrepancy involving Clay, from the missing funds to his illusions about covering expenses for his precious sales team. By the end, Lena's eyes had hardened to chips of green ice. That weaselly son of a bitch, she hissed, surprising me with her uncharacteristic venom. Don't worry, Arya, we'll make him pay for this deception, both financially and emotionally. I couldn't help the rush of gratitude and affection for my straight-shooting friend. Thank you, Lena. You have no idea how much it means to have you in my corner. Lena leaned forward, perfectly arched brows furrowed in thought. Okay, first thing we need to do is documentation. I'll draft a formal letter from my firm putting Clay on notice that his shady dealings won't be tolerated. We'll also need to look into your options for legal protection, just in case that slimeball tries anything underhanded. I nodded, finally feeling like I was taking back control. There's more. I think some of my dad's business funds may have also been compromised. Lena's eyes went wide with outrage. Clay stole from Max, too? Oh, that tears it. I'll make sure his expensive suits get taken away and he rots in prison. My lips twitched despite the circumstances. Only Lena could interweave snark and dogged loyalty so seamlessly. Slow down there, Bulldog. We need to gather hard proof first before looping in my dad. I placed a calming hand on her arm. For now, let's focus on legally protecting me and making sure Clay faces consequences for his thievery. Lena's severe expression softened slightly, and she gave a brisk nod. You're right. We do this methodically and by the book. God help that bastard once we put the screws to him. A sense of grim purpose settled over me. My marriage may have crumbled, but I refused to be another helpless victim of Clay's manipulation. With Lena's brilliant legal mind and my own determination, the deceitful facade was about to come crashing down. Justice and vengeance were on the horizon, and nothing would stop me from achieving both. Over the next few days, Lena and I compiled an airtight dossier documenting every suspicious transaction and questionable money trail involving Clay. My whole body thrummed with vindicated fury each time another piece of evidence materialized. I was bent over my laptop Friday evening, scouring Clay's company expenses yet again, when my cell phone buzzed with an incoming call from my dad. A knot formed in my stomach. I hadn't been ready to loop him in on this chaos just yet. Hey, Dad, what's up? I tried to keep my tone light. Arya, we need to talk. Max's gruff voice was laced with an uncharacteristic tension. It's about your husband and the company finances. I felt the blood drain from my face as realization crashed over me. Lena and I had been so focused on Clay's personal deception that we missed how deeply his thievery may have penetrated into my father's business world. I'm on my way over now, I said, already grabbing my purse and car keys. When I arrived at Max's house 20 minutes later, he was waiting in the den, a grim countenance etched on his chiseled features. This couldn't be good. His piercing gaze met mine as I entered. You weren't going to tell me about that snake, Clayton, misappropriating funds from my marketing software firm? I opened my mouth, but the words stuck in my throat. How did he find out? As if sensing my question, Max jerked his chin towards the love seat. Your friend Dean came to see me, showed me documents indicating your husband's been skimming money from client accounts and grossly overbilling. There was Dean, looking appropriately abashed at having spilled the beans. But his eyes were resolute. He clearly saw this as the moral thing to do. I'm so sorry, Arya, he said sincerely. I couldn't just stand by while Clay kept robbing your family like that. Not after all Max has done for the company and his employees. A surge of affection for my ethical colleague washed over me. No, Dean, you did the right thing. I was trying to gather proof before bringing this to Dad's attention. Max let out a gruff noise of assent. Good thinking. We'll need to blow that rat scheme out into the open with irrefutable evidence. For the next hour, Dean outlined the improper billing and accounting discrepancies, while I shared the documentation Lena and I had compiled regarding the personal finances. By the end, a pall of grim determination had settled over the three of us. So, I cleared my throat, keeping my voice as steady as possible. What's our next move to take down Clay? The muscle in Max's taut jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. We keep gathering proof, but don't make a move against him until we've got the full scope of his thievery. Lena's helping with this, I assume? I nodded. She's already got me separated financially and is working on legal protection just in case Clay retaliates. The barest hint of a smile played across Dean's lips. Smart woman, that Lena. Max slapped his hand down on the desk with a dull thud. Good. Clayton Barrett has messed with the wrong family this time. We'll hit him with everything we've got until that con man is destitute and behind bars where he belongs. The sheer venom in my normally stoic father's voice made me flinch. But I couldn't fault his fury. Clay had well and truly betrayed us all. I want to take the lead on this, I stated in a low voice. Clay's my husband, and his deception cuts the deepest with me. My dad's eyes bored into mine for a long moment before giving a solemn nod of agreement. Damn right, kiddo. We're all behind you 100% to take that scumbag down. Dean put a reassuring hand on my shoulder and gave it a supportive squeeze. United with the most important men in my life, a wave of fierce resolve washed over me. I would make Clay pay for every last cent he'd stolen. More importantly, I'd shatter the twisted facade he'd constructed and regain my sense of self, my independence, once and for all. The games were over. The reckoning had officially begun. Over the next few weeks, a cold determination took root within me, hardening my resolve with each new, unraveled deception. Thanks to Dean's diligent record-keeping and Lena's legal prowess, the full, sickening scope of Clay's financial crimes came into focus. Not only had he embezzled funds from my personal accounts, but he'd expertly skimmed money from client billings at my father's company through a complex system of shell corporations and insider deals with shady third-party vendors. His greed and arrogance knew no bounds. Your bastard husband has been bleeding us dry for years, Dad growled, poring over the documentation one evening. The muscle in his weathered jaw twitched with barely restrained fury. We've got him nailed to the wall on multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, you name it. Lena's lips curved into a predatory smile, green eyes glinting with vengeful triumph. That double-crossing snake is going down hard. While settling the legal noose around Clay's neck, Lena and Dean were also advising me on establishing financial independence, securing credit and assets solely in my name, squirreling away cash reserves in preparation for an inevitable divorce battle. I'd be damned if I let Clayton manipulate me into domestic violence victim territory, living off grudging alimony scraps. With every dossier review and money trail unraveled, my own sense of self-determination deepened. The insidious fog of marital gaslighting that Clay had woven now dissipated in the cold, harsh light of his deceptions. He'd inflicted the cruelest form of betrayal by robbing from my family while eroding my sense of self-worth. But like the mythological phoenix, I was rising from the ashes of my codependent naivete. Arya, we've got everything lined up to crush that weasel, Lena said, jaw set in a grim line. The million-dollar question is, do you want to confront Clayton before or after we lower the legal boom? I stared her down, body humming with a buzzing undercurrent of wrath. While part of me wanted the smug shock value of blindsiding Clay after he'd been indicted on multiple felonies, I knew that wasn't my style. More importantly, I wanted to look into his cold, vapid eyes when I ripped the mask off his deceitful facade, to leave no doubt that I outwitted and overpowered him at every turn. And so it was that I found myself gripping the damning evidence file with white knuckles as I strode into Clay's hotel suite 3 nights later. He'd been traveling on yet another regional manager trip, code for some extended tryst with a mistress bankrolled by his ill-gotten gains. Working a bit late tonight, aren't we? His lips split into that annoyingly cocky grin I'd once found charming as I stepped into the dimly lit living area. He drained the last sip of scotch from his tumbler. To what do I owe the pleasure of this surprise visit, Mrs. Barrett? The overwhelming stench of Chyper perfume, his latest tawdry conquest no doubt, wafted from the bedroom suite. My grip tightened further on the file until the edges crinkled. Cut the smarmy bullshit, Clay. You and I both know surprise visits have never been your forte. His lopsided smirk faltered ever so slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Summoning every last ounce of icy calm I possessed, I strode forward and slammed the thick evidence file onto the marble-topped cocktail table, scattering the contents in a frenzied spiral of incriminating documents and bank statements. "It means I know everything, you degenerate sack of shit." The words hissed through my gritted teeth. "Every illicit transfer, every shady account, every penny you stole from me and my family's company while parading around like some high-rolling corporate raider." Clay's face turned to stone as the gravity of the situation came crashing down around him. He opened his mouth, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Don't bother lying or feigning innocence. That ship sailed the moment you helped yourself to my life savings to fund your tawdry affairs and inflated expense accounts." I allowed myself a grim half-smile at the utterly bewildered look on his face. "What, you thought I'd never catch on? That I'd stay your meek, obedient little wife forever while you conned me blind?" Clay's jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin line. "You've got it all wrong, Arya. I can explain every last cent." With a rough jerk of his arm, he swiped the damning papers off the cocktail table in an angry clatter. "The company's been going through some transitional headaches, but I have it all under control. As for your money, I told you before, it's our assets pooled together." "Our assets?" I let out a humorless bark of laughter. "Wake up and smell the jail cell you've earned yourself. Those convoluted money trails and insider deals prove you bilked literally millions from my father's firm and my own accounts." Clay visibly paled at my words, but leveled his patented ice-cold glare my way. "You ungrateful little bitch. Is this the thanks I get for providing you a life of luxury? I'll bury you and that senile old prick Max in litigation until you're both bankrupt shells." White-hot anger spiked through me, momentarily stealing my breath at his callous arrogance. I stood there shaking with rage while he fumed and blathered more hollow threats and deflections. Finally, I raised my hand again, silencing his tirade. When I spoke, the tone was low and measured, yet laced with undisguised disgust. "Let me make one thing crystal clear, you sniveling worm. The free ride is over. No more embezzling from my family's hard-earned assets. No more living a champagne lifestyle by robbing from everyone around you with sociopathic glee." My gaze bored into his, ensuring he registered the full gravity and finality of my next words. "I want a divorce, Clay. And I'll make sure you're left with nothing but a future of hand-me-down suits and prison-issued jumpsuits once the law catches up to your racketeering." In that instant, any facade of control Clay maintained came crashing down in spectacular fashion. Letting out a feral roar of rage, he lunged across the marble table and grabbed me by the shoulders, his grip punishing and brutal. "You stupid, delusional whore. Everything I built, every bloody advantage and connection I've cultivated, was for us, for our future." He gave me a vicious shake, splattering spittle across my face. "You'll never be anything more than a worthless trust fund brat without me." While part of me inwardly recoiled from the menacing violence radiating off him in waves, I remained utterly impassive, staring back at him with eyes made of granite. I'd prepared myself for the inevitability of his volcanic reaction to the truth. "We're done here," I enunciated each word with surgical precision, refusing to give him an inch while twisting free of his grasp. "The company and my father's legal team will deal with you appropriately from here on out." Snatching up the scattered papers and folders, I spun on my heel and strode for the suite door, movements cold and economical. I'd feigned bravery many times in the face of Clay's posturing before, but no longer. "You dare walk away from me? You ungrateful little cunt!" His voice dripped with venom and wounded ego as he grabbed my arm in a vice-like grip. "I'll bury you in litigation hell until you—" His spittle-laced tirade was cut short as a thick muscular arm clamped around his windpipe from behind, squeezing just shy of full restriction. The imposing form of my dad loomed over Clay's suddenly panicked expression. "That's enough out of you, dirtbag." Max's tone was lethal calm as he shoved Clay backwards, allowing him to flounder and gasp for air. "Threaten my little girl again, and the next grip crushes your trachea." The explosive introduction of my father's imposing presence clearly gave Clay pause, and he staggered back a few steps, knuckles whitening around his abused neck. I allowed myself a tight, triumphant smirk as I took in the scene. "Guess we're done with the false pretenses and sugarcoating the truth. My father's company is pressing charges against you for embezzling over $5 million from the firm's client account. Not to mention the multiple fraud and tax evasion charges awaiting once the authorities start digging into your slush funds and bogus vendors. You have no proof. Clay wheezed, beads of sweat speckled across his flushed brow. My lawyers will grind this joke of an accusation into the dirt. My expression hardened. Don't insult our intelligence. Between the paper trail linking your offshore accounts to dozens of improper money transfers and Dean's verified records from within the firm, you're beyond cooked. Dad took a menacing step forward. Any minute now, the local police and feds will be swarming this hotel on our call. Plenty of proof to take you into custody while we build the criminal case against you. Clay's veneer of composure was crumbling rapidly. I could see the panic beginning to set in behind his eyes as the sheer futility of his situation dawned on him. Arya, think about what you're doing. You destroy me here, and I'll make sure you and your whole clueless family are destitute within a year. I let out a hollow peal of laughter, unfazed by his desperate threats. Keep flapping your gums, you degenerate snake. The only things you'll be making from now on are license plates and shivs for your new cellmates. Taking one last look at his sweaty, bulging-eyed countenance, I tossed the evidence folder at his feet in a contemptuous shower of documents. Thanks for the memories, Clayton. Your vile actions have freed me in ways you'll never understand. With that parting shot, I turned and strode from the room, my father falling into lockstep beside me. Sweet, heady relief washed over me with every passing step away from the soon-to-be prison-bound wretch. The worst was behind me. All that remained was basking in the restorative justice to come. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of police interviews, emergency board meetings at my father's company, and Clay's increasingly desperate attempts to bully his way out of the mounting charges. But Lena had the situation on ironclad legal lockdown. Armed with the comprehensive evidence we'd compiled, she deftly maneuvered past each of Clay's pitiful objections and stall tactics from his admittedly slick team of corporate lawyers. It all came to a head at an emergency board meeting, convened to decide Clay's immediate fate with the company. With the Department of Justice breathing down our necks, a rapid resolution was required before the feds applied for an asset freeze on all revenue tied to his alleged fraud. This is a personal vendetta orchestrated by my estranged wife and her lunatic family. Clay's voice echoed through the stifling conference room as the proceedings kicked off. He stabbed a manicured finger at me where I sat flanked by Lena and Max. Arya has manufactured these wild fabrications out of spite because I dared file for divorce first. A low rumble of incredulous muttering filled the room from the assembled board members and executives. Even his staunchest old boy enablers seemed skeptical of that narrative given the overwhelmingly detailed evidence. That's enough, Mr. Barrett. Roger Kingsley, CEO of our parent corporation, spoke in a clipped, no-nonsense tone as he rapped his knuckles on the glossy tabletop. The forensic auditors and federal investigators have compiled more than enough documentation exposing your complex money laundering and theft from client accounts. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Clay's face go pallid, sweat beading on his taut brow. He opened his mouth to object, but Roger raised a solitary hand, silencing him. Furthermore, bank records and electronic data trails show you repeatedly pillaged marketing funds and cash reserves to finance your lavish personal expenditures and indiscretions. The older man's eyes blazed with undisguised contempt behind his wireframe glasses. Clay's Adam's apple bobbed rapidly as each new damning revelation piled atop the last, effectively burying him in an avalanche of incriminating facts. In light of this overwhelming evidence and the legal liability you represent, you're hereby stripped of all corporate authority and terminated for moral turpitude, effective immediately. Roger punctuated the statement by slamming his palm down on the table with a dull thud. This is an outrageous miscarriage of justice. Clay shot to his feet, face mottled with fury as he shouted down at the impassive Kingsley. When my legal team is through with your corrupt evidence and sham proceedings, none of you will have jobs. He whirled towards me, eyes mere slits of impotent rage. You'll regret letting your psychotic need for revenge open this Pandora's box, Arya. At that moment, the double doors at the rear of the conference room banged open with a clatter. Two grim-faced U.S. Marshals in crisp blue windbreakers strode in, flanking a diminutive woman in a no-nonsense navy pantsuit. Clayton Barrett? The petite woman's voice carried a commanding presence that belied her stature as she addressed the now bewildered Clay. My name is Sarah Wilkins, special agent with the FBI's Fraud Investigation Unit. She allowed the slightest hint of a thin smile to crease her severe features. You're under arrest for multiple counts of money laundering, embezzlement, tax evasion, and corporate fraud. Anything you say can and will be used against you. For a moment, the room hung in stunned silence as two burly deputy marshals advanced and cuffed the now sputtering Clay, his jaw working furiously, but no words emerging. I turned a grateful eye towards Lena, who was sporting a rather self-satisfied grin as she watched her tormentor being hauled away, his expensive suit and disheveled hair the only remnants of the facade he'd so arrogantly maintained for years. Don't look so smug just yet, a nasal voice snarled as Clay caught my eye. You'll slip on a banana peel one of these days, Arya. And when you hit rock bottom with nothing and no one, maybe you'll appreciate the life I tried to build us. With that pathetic departing shot, the marshals wrestled Clay out of the room as Roger addressed the remaining shell-shocked assemblage. Thank you all for your patience and discretion during this catastrophic legal matter. I assure you, once the dust settles, we'll rebuild Kingsley Marketing to be an even stronger firm, one where ethics and public trust aren't merely corporate platitudes. As the meeting dispersed amid a low buzz of scandal-tinged chatter, Lena pulled me aside with an almost feral look of vindicated triumph shining in her eyes. Well, your lying, cheating snake of an ex just got his jaw-dropping comeuppance. Her smile was all shark-like bravado. That smug prick won't know what hit him once the weight of the federal indictments really sinks in. Though I should have been elated at Clay's unceremonious apprehension and professional demise, an inexplicable pang of melancholy tugged at my chest as I headed home. Maybe it was the raw fury and hate still radiating off him like body heat, or the glaring truth that any remnant of the decent, driven man I fell for was permanently extinguished. Either way, the facade keeping us together as husband and wife had finally been obliterated, by my own hand, no less. I shuddered to think what Clayton's next moves might entail as the walls closed in. Whatever happened, I refused to surrender one more ounce of power or self-respect to that cancerous relationship. Clay's bombastic implosion and arrest were just the opening salvo in what would become a brutally drawn-out legal battle over the coming months. While federal prosecutors steadily built their sweeping racketeering case against him, my divorce attorneys initiated a blitzkrieg of personal litigation simultaneously. Armed with Lena's meticulous documentation of Clay's myriad financial crimes and personal indiscretions, they systematically dismantled the facade of his frivolous annulment filings, one after another. Within weeks, the galling reality of my inevitable full divorce and asset separation sunk in for the incarcerated Clay. He retaliated with the only tactics he knew: intimidation and unbridled cruelty. Venomous phone calls and letters arrived with escalating frequency, each more vile and threatening than the last, as he grew increasingly desperate in his quest for leverage. Take a look at this latest missive from your sociopath ex-hubby. Lena tossed a crumpled sheaf of papers onto my kitchen counter one afternoon, mouth twisted with disgust. I scanned the pages with a weary sigh, unsurprised to find more of Clay's all-too-familiar bile regurgitated in angry, looping scrawls. Details of sordid sexual escapades and expletive-laced insults filled the rantings, clear attempts to shame and demean me. How original. More pathetic Mako intimidation when he can't win on merits. I tossed the pages aside, unfazed by his bluster at this point. Keep tabs on these unhinged tangents in case we need a restraining order. The fact was, Clay Barrett's downfall had accelerated into a horrifying death spiral, stripping away every vestige of the arrogant blue blood success he'd so carefully cultivated over the years. Within 6 months, every asset in his name, from the Hamptons Beach House to his beloved Mercedes-AMG Coupe and Patek Philippe watch collection, were liquidated and frozen to satisfy hundreds of thousands in mounting legal fees and potential restitution penalties. By the following fall, Grim-faced federal agents arrived at the downtown luxury loft I'd purchased solely in my name and rousted Clay away to await trial. His previously buffed and groomed veneer was now replaced by a hunched, haunted look, dark circles engulfing his deadened eyes as marshals shackled and led him into a waiting transport van. "Don't get too comfortable in your ivory tower, sweetheart," he called over his shoulder at me, desperation and hatred dripping from his words. "Once I take these lying monsters down in court and prove my innocence, you'll be broke and homeless without me." I merely stared back at him, features blank and impassive, while inwardly marveling at how swiftly the mighty could crumble under the weight of their own sins and arrogance. My independence was secure. The last 2 years of meticulous legal groundwork by Lena and Max had ensured no messy asset retaliation or convoluted reversal of fortune. Clay would face his reckoning alone and destitute, exactly as I'd vowed. As the battered transport van pulled away with my disgraced ex in tow, I turned and headed back inside, the faintest ghost of a relieved smile teasing my lips. I was free. As the dust settled in the months following Clay's dramatic imprisonment and our acrimonious divorce finalization, a profound sense of relief and renewal washed over me. Gone were the constant mind games, the gaslighting, the endless cycle of walking on eggshells around his volatile ego and emasculated rage. For the first time in over a decade, I was beholden to no one but myself, free from the shackles of codependence and manipulation that Clay had so insidiously bound me with. The very notion made me want to shout from the rooftops in pure, uninhibited elation. Instead, I channeled that euphoric energy into reclaiming my sense of self-worth and blazing new trails, both personally and professionally. This new chapter demanded a clean slate. "You've paid your dues and conquered that sadistic monster, kiddo?" Dad clasped my shoulder affectionately as we strolled through the bustling downtown streets one crisp autumn evening. "Time to spread your wings and truly soar now that he can't hold you back." I gave him an appreciative smile and reciprocated the squeeze, marveling at how our previous fractures and strained codependency had mended throughout this tumultuous stretch. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have regained my footing without you and Lena relentlessly in my corner." "Don't thank me yet," he chuckled gruffly, waggling his eyebrows. "You've got the hard-driving business acumen that's kept this family soaring for decades. The company's marketing team is yours for the taking if you'll have it." While the prospect of leading my father's pride and joy venture filled me with no small trepidation, I couldn't deny the allure of that challenge, of proving I could helm a thriving enterprise by my own merits after everything with Clay. Embracing his poisoned legacy of deception and fear would be the ultimate cleansing rebirth. "You've got yourself a deal, old man." Squaring my shoulders defiantly, I allowed a self-assured grin to spread across my face. "I'll make you proud and elevate that team to unprecedented heights." By the following spring, I'd firmly rooted myself as managing director of Kingsley Marketing, orchestrating a full-scale creative and strategic overhaul that propelled the once imperiled agency back into profitability. Every boardroom negotiation, every hard-won new client acquisition and ensuing celebration was a cold slap of validation that I'd finally untangled myself from Clay's toxic web. And indeed, any faint murmurs of my disgraced ex's lingering animosity vanished once he was remanded to federal prison on a dizzying array of fraud and financial laundering convictions. After smugly short-circuiting the legal process for months with a cavalcade of motions and delay tactics, that first shocking footage of Clayton being led shackled from the courthouse in a tattered blue jumpsuit spread like wildfire through our professional circles. By all accounts, he faced a harsh, uncompromising stretch of 15 to 20 years behind bars, with financial penalties astronomical enough to ensure he'd never reclaim his previously high-flying lifestyle and ego upon release. Yet in stark contrast to his humiliating downfall, I found myself scaling new professional peaks and embracing profound personal growth daily. Quickly establishing a reputation as a dynamic leader with integrity and vision, I fielded a dizzying array of career opportunities beyond the Kingsley umbrella. Turning down those lucrative offers was as gratifying as shedding those final invisible shackles of my traumatic marital past. Instead, I poured my energies into not just professional achievements, but selflessly mentoring other women, striving to sidestep the cycles of domestic turmoil and subjugation that I'd narrowly escaped, inspiring them to harness their innate self-worth and chart their own ambitious courses, just as Lena and my father had shown me in my darkest hours. At last, I was the master of my own destiny, a thriving phoenix risen from the ashes of Clayton Barrett's twisted agenda with wings spanning ever further horizons. No longer would I be defined by his deceptions and cruelties, or wilt under his stifling control. I'd confronted those shadows head-on and emerged reborn into the self-possessed, confident woman I was always meant to become.
Our desire to construct a large, new home had finally materialized, and I was ecstatic about the prospect of starting a new chapter in our life. But just as we were getting ready to celebrate, my in-laws unexpectedly made an appearance. They requested my parents to vacate the property and said, "We'll be moving in here," in a strong tone. I was shocked and looked to my husband for consolation, but all he could manage was a deep breath and a "please do as they ask" expression. Inform your folks politely. I felt a mixture of disbelief and resentment as I watched my in-laws excitedly unpack and settle into what was supposed to be our new home. "Do you realize this is our house?" In the hopes that they would realize my mistake, I asked. "Tiffany is my name. I am 32 years old, and I have been happily married to Jesse for 4 years. Even though we are childless at this time, we have a loving and supportive relationship. I've been worried about my aging parents lately. I've been thinking a lot about their deteriorating mobility, which is why I suggested that Jesse and I move in with them to help them." Jess nodded without hesitation, understanding that having us around would help them and also provide us with peace of mind. He had replied, "It's a win-win situation," and I was incredibly appreciative of his sympathy and understanding. We thought about this strategy, but the practicalities were challenging. The distance between my family's home and the city makes commuting more difficult for us since none of us drives. It wasn't a good idea to move my parents into our tiny city rental either, especially because it was already small for the two of us. Thinking about having kids in the future would just make the space problem worse. In the face of these difficulties, I'd boldly suggested a solution. Why not construct a brand new house that could comfortably fit everyone? The thought brightened up Jesse's face. "What a great idea," he cried out. Inspired by his zeal, we set out to design and construct a house that would meet all of our requirements. My parents felt a little guilty at first for causing such trouble when I told them I was planning to build a house big enough for everyone. But as I explained why we were doing this, their fear became excitement, which made me feel so relieved and happy. Later, to finalize the details of our project, my husband and I went to a real estate company. Our top priorities were to select places that would make our daily trips easier and be close to train stations so that my parents could easily receive medical care. My parents seemed a little apprehensive about the prospect of moving in with us during our conversations regarding the features of the house. Fortunately, my spouse provided some wise counsel that made the preparation process go more smoothly. Our ideal house began to take shape as we moved forward, and the joy was evident. We were prepared to begin consulting with builders after completing our plans and engaging in lengthy web research. The preparations were almost complete, I said, admitting that house building was turning out to be more work than I had thought. "Working and juggling this definitely slows down progress," my spouse continued, considering the difficulties we had. Our ideas required a significant amount of time and effort, and the outcomes were incredibly fulfilling. Our expectations were greatly surpassed by the precisely designed blueprint. To get to this conclusion, we spoke with a number of real estate brokers and worked through extensive internet research, All that was left to do was wait impatiently for our house to be finished. Though there was a lot of enthusiasm and anticipation, it would take some time. But as the project progressed, my in-laws started to get more interested. "We've heard that you're building a new home, dear. Is it correct?" they inquired one day. "Yes, that is accurate. We want to be done with it by the end of the year," I answered. "How lovely." They genuinely expressed interest in our endeavor when they said, "Jess's efforts and the way he keeps us updated with all the details are so impressive." Though surprised by my mother-in-law's unexpected desire to come see us soon, I gladly accepted. My husband and I decided to visit them during the next weekend. They smiled warmly at us, and the topic of our new home project soon came up. "Don't you think it's such a happy occasion to build a new house?" my father-in-law asked, sounding thoughtful as if he were thinking back on his own experiences. I answered, "Yes, we're very excited. We hope the construction wraps up smoothly and quickly so we can move in as soon as possible." We all laughed together at the thrilling trip that lay ahead. My mother-in-law was curious and said, "Could we see the blueprints?" My spouse responded by taking out his phone and displaying a picture of the design to them. "Well, it's pretty roomy," she said. "And so many rooms." "Yes, well, we'll be living with my parents, so we needed the extra space," I replied. My in-laws exchanged shocked looks with my spouse. They questioned, "You're all moving in together?" "Yes," my spouse replied. "Since my parents are getting older, we suggested living together, which led us to decide to build a new house." Their tone changed slightly, showing a trace of unease, to "Really? I see," they replied. I swiftly shifted the topic in an attempt to diffuse the situation. "How are you two doing? What state are you in physically?" "We're doing well. No major changes, just the usual routine," they responded. But there was still curiosity regarding our plans. "Please elaborate about the new home. Which room are your parents going to use?" they asked. The mood had definitely changed, as my husband explained by pointing to the blueprint. Their expressions had tightened, though he seemed unaware of the shift. Still, we talked about the arrangement, thinking that maybe our mutual enthusiasm for the fresh starts would finally calm everyone down. I was concerned that my in-laws would think we were favoring my parents when they found out we were moving in with them. Though I felt a little guilty, I hoped they would respect our choice and take my parents' needs into account. But it was becoming clear that they were having difficulty accepting it. Our new home's building was proceeding without any problems, and we could see it getting closer to completion every time we visited. My spouse was always excited about getting settled right away, but like him, I struggled to balance my desire for everything to be perfect with my joy for a fresh start. My parents visited to check on the development around halfway through the construction. Their happiness and appreciation filled me with immense thankfulness that we were able to provide them this wonderful home. In the meantime, I discovered that my spouse had been spending practically every weekend lately with his parents. "Are you planning to visit your parents again this weekend?" I questioned him. "Yes, indeed," he answered. When I mentioned how often he's been visiting since the beginning of the year, he said, "I also want to express my gratitude to them. I've been trying to go see them on my days off because of this." Knowing what he was going to do, I inquired, "Should I come along?" I was worried that his parents, who might have hoped to move in with us, would feel let out or disappointed. I reasoned that paying them a visit would be a nice act of kindness. But my spouse comforted me, saying, "It's okay. I'm capable of handling things on my own," he said, heading to his parents' house. I committed to support him as needed and made the decision to respect his decision. Time passed quickly, and soon our new home was prepared. We were so excited to begin this new chapter together that on moving day, we packed the car with boxes and drove off to our new house. I couldn't help but utter the words, "Wow, our new home," as soon as we pulled up to our gorgeous new house. It represented the start of an entirely new chapter. I found myself daydreaming about our future there, picturing hosting family picnics and preparing meals while observing my spouse play with our future child in the backyard. My excitement was heightened even more by these ideas. That's when my folks called. They told us they would be delayed because of traffic when they were meant to move in with us. We should start getting settled in, they said, but I asked that we wait for you. His parents unexpectedly showed up there, much to my surprise, as I was about to share this sentiment with my spouse. I watched in shock as they grinned and came walking toward us after getting out of their automobile. "Look at this magnificent house. It's impressive enough to show off to our friends," they exclaimed. "Yes, it's the house that Jesse and I carefully planned," I replied. "Tiffany, you have excellent taste," my mother-in-law complimented. "Well, I suppose I can give her credit for that," I said, managing a thankful nod. To my astonishment, they began unloading a considerable amount of luggage from their car, leaving me baffled. I quickly asked my mother-in-law and father-in-law, "Why do you have so much stuff? What are you planning to do?" Their reply caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" "We're moving our things into this house," they said. "You're planning to live here starting today, but you'll need to ask your parents to leave." "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice tinged with disbelief and frustration. My mother-in-law then explained, "As a new bride, it's customary to prioritize your husband's family." The unexpected twist left me struggling to reconcile the joy of our new beginning with the sudden challenge of balancing family expectations and our carefully laid plans. Feeling a wave of emotions, I turned to my husband for support when his parents declared that they should be the ones moving into the new house. Taking a deep breath, he told me, "Just let your parents know gently." I felt a rush of disbelief. This house was intended for me and my parents. "I can't accept this decision," I protested. His response came with visible irritation. "Didn't my mom just explain that it's natural for a wife to prioritize her husband's family? We can address your parents' situation later." I was stunned. It was painfully clear that my husband was either under heavy influence from his parents or shared their views, which were now glaringly apparent. "Come on, help with the moving," he urged as his parents began unloading their belongings, despite my parents and I not having set foot inside the house yet. "Oh, how wonderful! The interior is just splendid," they exclaimed eagerly, exploring the house. I confronted them. "Do you even know whose house this is?" "What?" they responded, clearly taken aback. After a brief pause, they turned to face me, asserting, "Whose house? Of course, it's Jess's house. Are you suggesting you have a claim to it? Since you and Jess are living here, and he's put so much into building this house, you have no right to make any claims without letting us explain first." It seemed my in-laws had jumped to conclusions and were quick to place blame on me, indicating that my husband hadn't shared the full details about our financial contributions to the house. "Why would your parents live in Jesse's house in the first place?" they said. "Indeed, it is peculiar," they added mockingly. "Poor Jesse, with such a demanding wife and parents." My breaking point had reached. Why do they blame me for their misinterpretations? "Jess ought to make up the difference if you plan to stay here," I said. "I've helped build this house," I said, shocking them with my assertion. "What is the amount that you say you have paid?" It must be a little sum, perhaps $100, they jeered. My spouse said nothing, appearing uneasy. I faced him, posing a challenge. Are you telling the truth? How big and powerful do you believe yourself to be? Uncertain of what to say next, he hesitated. With an authoritative tone, my mother-in-law asked, "What are you insinuating?" Observing my spouse's unwillingness to confront the matter, I made the decision to make things clear for good. My savings were used exclusively to purchase this home. I want $460,000 back from you if you intend to reside here, covering the cost of the house. My in-laws looked genuinely surprised. Their eyes widened in shock, and their mouths hung open. They looked instantly to my spouse for approval. Is this accurate, Jesse? Did Tiffany purchase this house? They questioned, unable to accept the truth of the circumstance. My spouse gave a hesitant nod of agreement. Yes, Tiffany did purchase the home. She recently got a promotion and now makes more money than I do. Then he revealed a more intimate detail. Yet, despite my extensive professional experience and distinguished university education, I recently committed a grave error at work. I lost my job and even had my pay reduced. I'm now making the same money as a new hire. As they took in this information, the room fell silent. We never thought Jesse would find himself in this predicament. There was a startled stillness for a moment, and then their attitude toward me changed radically. We sincerely apologized to Tiffany for our previous remarks. We got everything all wrong. With regretful and apologetic tones, they begged to be forgiven and allowed to remain in this mansion. My husband bowed deeply as he joined in as well. Please accept my apologies for not informing you sooner. Permit us to remain with you here. I was shocked by their abrupt change in attitude and begged for forgiveness. They apologized, but I refused to back down. However much you beg, I am unable to accept this. In order to live with my parents, I built this house. There's no need in keeping this house if that's not feasible. I'll take $460,000 from you if you want to live here. We don't have that kind of money, they said, their expressions lowering. It appears that you will have to locate another place to go, I stated, adamant in my choice. Wait, they chimed in. We sold our previous home and moved out. My in-laws went into a desperation mode when they realized they would be forced out of our new home. Please allow us to stay, Tiffany. They begged. Your parents can live with us too. I found it impossible to imagine having both sets of parents live under one roof. I cannot concur with it. You should have some money left over if you sold your house. Why not use it to locate an apartment? I inquired. Tears filled their eyes at this. In actuality, we suffered a sizable loss on an unwise investment. We used the proceeds from the sale of our home and our retirement funds to settle that obligation. Nothing remains for us. My spouse and I are both retired, and she is too old to be working as a housewife. You hold our sole hope, they acknowledged. Their sincere request nonetheless. I believed that their poor money management was the cause of the predicament. Shouldn't you ask your son for assistance if you need it? I answered, I'm not in a position to help strangers. Aren't we family too? They questioned, a great deal of emotion in their voices. That is asking for too much. Could you please lend us a little assistance? They begged some more, but I refused. It's not feasible. Living with someone whose family is attempting to seize control of our house is unimaginable to me. I had an extreme fit of rage and blurted, Jesse, let's get a divorce. What? He cried out. I can't even think about a divorce. I apologize, but this is beyond forgiveness. Please go now, I commanded. While his parents persisted in pleading, my husband became anxious at the mere idea of divorce. But my resolution was set in stone. I told my in-laws, "If you plan to stay here, I'll call the police." And they fled in terror. Shaken, my spouse objected, saying, "I'm still your spouse. I ought to be allowed to remain here. I'll go to court if you persist." I responded with firmness. Realizing that a lawsuit could jeopardize his job, he quickly gathered his belongings and left. My parents came shortly after his departure, perplexed by his absence. When I told them what was going on, they were astonished but thanked me. They said, "Thank you for defending us." Before our baby was born, I was glad to have cut ties with such a self-centered in-law family, even if I wished my husband had been more tolerant. My divorce went through without a hitch, and I was back on my own again soon after. Now that pandemonium had been replaced by calm, I relished quiet days with my folks in our recently constructed home. My name is Alice. Who hasn't gone through difficult times. My dad was everything to me and my rock. It's just the two of us against the world ever since Mom died when I was a tiny child. He constantly emphasized the value of education and did his best to save every penny I needed to pursue my college education. He would give me a wink and tell me, "You're going to make it, kiddo," while continuing to add small amounts of money to our tattered college fund jar. I gave him credence. Above all, I had faith in us. I enrolled at the nearby community college after high school with the goal of becoming well known in the investment management industry. I got to know Tom there. He was affable and disheveled, exuding a fresh out-of-bed charm that somehow did wonders on me. He belonged to my cohort. We hit it off right away, exchanging glances over lukewarm cafeteria coffee and laughs between lectures. Then the floor gave way under me. Dad died suddenly, without any prior notice. Our financial security vanished as well, like a house of cards in a breeze. The college money proved to be more wishful than practical. In addition to missing Dad and his advice, I had to come to terms with the fact that my time as a college student was running out. With perseverance and scraps, I made it through my first year, but as the money dried up, I had to drop out. The flat, a modest 3-bedroom in a dilapidated area of town, was Dad's gift to me. Though little, it was home. On a cold evening, Tom arrived at the apartment with his hand tucked into the pockets of his faded pants. With a glance around the room where the wallpaper was softly peeling at the corners, he said, "You live here alone, Alice?" "Yeah, just me now," I answered, attempting to tamp down a particularly disobedient wallpaper strip. "It's not much, but it's what I've got." After observing me for a while, he moved in closer and clasped my hands. "Alice, let's get married. I want to look after you. Here, let's begin our lives together." Yes, it was abrupt, but why start now when nothing in my life had ever been planned? I said, "Okay, Tom," and it felt appropriate. Our wait was short. With only a few people present, the wedding took place at City Hall and was as simple as they come. Tom's parents failed to appear. They had never really liked me. They'd whispered that I was too plain and that I couldn't hear them. It stung that none of us did. However, Tom returned the squeeze, whispering, "I love you. That is all that is important." We strolled back to my, now our, apartment after the ceremony. The sidewalk was covered in deep shadows by the late afternoon sun. Tom broke open a bottle of the least expensive champagne available at the corner store and gave each of us a shaky glass filled with frothy goodness. To us, he raised his glass in salute. With a taste of promise and fresh starts, The champagne fizzed on my tongue as I repeated the toast. I had a deal with Tom. As I settled the invoices, he would focus on the books. After he finished college, it would be my chance to pursue the degree I abandoned when life became too difficult. Easy enough, huh? Though nothing is ever so simple. So's what I also thought. I had 2 jobs. During the day, I worked as a grocery store cashier, where I had to cope with long lineups and occasionally late customers. At night, I changed into a waitress uniform and worked as a server at a nearby diner, where I served late-night drifters and truckers lousy burgers and lukewarm coffee. Even though it was exhausting, I persevered because I knew that one day I would return through those college doors. Tom, on the other hand, claimed to be knee-deep in his studies. But as they did, so did his demands. "When is dinner, Alice?" He would always grumble as soon as I dragged my tired body through the door. "I can't eat this fast food crap anymore. I need something decent, like Mom used to make." I would throw my keys on the table and bite back my irritated, tired rage. "Tom, you should try cooking it yourself. I'm not your mother." He would frown and avert his eyes. "My goal in learning is to succeed in life. The very least you could do was have a tidy home." His words would ignite a fire in my chest, slicing through my fatigue. However, I would eat the response, worried about the rift it may create in our already brittle accord. Tom's folks weren't very helpful. Compared to my diner-stained clothing and high school certificate, they were well-educated and polished. They hardly ever acknowledged me. And when they did, it was always with a sly smile or a barely concealed criticism. "If you had completed your schooling, my love," Tom's mother would say, drinking her expertly prepared tea and peering over the rims of her glasses. Tom just nodded along, taking in their comments as if they were gospel without even defending myself. He would spend evenings there more and more, running away from our small apartment and all of the obligations that came with it. Tom dropped another blow one evening while I was cleaning the grease from the diner under my fingernails. "I'm spending the night with my parents, require a decent night's sleep, and a genuine study space. I may have slammed the bathroom cupboard a little too hard." "Fine, do what you got to do." The words were piercing, stinging with all the things I was unable to express. I took comfort in my rituals as the days stretched into months. My occupation's monotonous duties helped me to forget about my growing difficulties at home. I went through the processes like a robot, scanning the objects, grinning, serving meals, cleaning up, rinsing, and repeating. After a very long night, I arrived home to find my apartment empty. "Not sorry, Tom, just a note. A way to study. Ensure that tomorrow's dinner is prepared." I creased the message, the sheet severing in my hand. I gave myself a moment, alone myself in the dark light of our kitchen, to truly feel everything: the weariness, the loneliness, the boiling rage. I closed my eyes and leaned against the counter, trying not to cry aloud, but letting a silent one slip out. Eventually, Tom graduated after years of working 2 jobs and watched himself lose himself in his books. The news that Tom had almost instantly been hired by a prestigious company was a breath of fresh air in our otherwise stressful existence. Compared to my nightly tips at the cafe, his new employment came with a paycheck that felt like a lottery win. I remember sitting across from him at our small kitchen table one evening, the excitement bubbling up inside me. "So with your new job, I was thinking it might be time for me to cut back at work and start looking at programs, to pick up where I left off." Tom didn't look up from his plate. "Alice, we can't afford that. Every penny has to be accounted for. And with the way things are, You know how tight the budget is." His fork clattered against the plate, a harsh sound that matched his words. I leaned back, my heart sinking, but not yet defeated. I could keep one job, maybe just the day shifts. We'd still have a steady income, and I could manage night classes. He shook his head, his voice firm and dismissive. "Just forget about college, Alice. We need stability, not more debts. It's not practical." The conversation ended there, but the argument continued in my head for days. Before I could press the issue further, I found out I was pregnant. Our daughter, Lily, became my new priority, and college faded into the background, a dream dissolved. Raising Lily was a joy, but it was also another chain tying me to routines and responsibilities I hadn't chosen alone. I continued working at the grocery store, my dreams shelved like the products I stopped. Tom's criticisms didn't stop with my shelved education. They seeped into my parenting. "You're not doing it right, Alice. She needs to learn proper manners, not whatever it is you're trying to teach her," Tom would say, barely looking up from his phone. I remember holding Lily close, whispering promises to her that I'd begun to doubt I could keep. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." As Lily grew, Tom's parents became more involved. Their influence overshadowed mine. They paid for a fancy preschool, and every school event was an exhibition of their grandparental pride. One evening, Tom clearly explained a new rule. "Alice, it's best if you don't come to the school events. The teachers, they have a certain expectation of family. We can't ruin Lily's opportunities." I felt the sting of those words, a slap dressed up as paternal concern. So what am I supposed to do? Just stay home and pretend I don't have a daughter who's growing up, learning things I'm not teaching her, becoming someone I barely know? "It's for the best," was all he said, his indifference the final nail in the coffin of our once shared dreams. The years twisted along, and Tom's words had weight. Not the kind that anchors you in safety, but the kind that pulls you under. His sharp commands to our daughter, Lily, left marks, teaching her lessons of disrespect and disdain toward me, our mother. "Don't bother telling her what to do. She listens to me, not you. It's for her own good," Tom snapped one evening when I suggested Lily might set the table. In front of Lily, his words were always like this. I watched, heart sinking, as my little girl's eyes hardened to match her father's. "You don't know anything, Mom." Lily would toss at me when I asked for help around the house, her tone mimicking her father's, each word a barb. I tried to reach her, to bridge the widening gap with mother-daughter chats, but she only pulled further away, retreating to a world where I couldn't follow, a world painted by Tom and his parents. One humiliating afternoon brought everything painfully into focus. Lily had friends over, laughter and light voices echoing down the hallway of our home. I was cleaning when I bumped into them in the hall. Lily froze, her eyes darting between me and her friends. I smiled, wiping my hands on my apron, about to say hello, but before the words could form, Lily cut in. "Oh, this is just our housekeeper." Her friends nodded, barely giving me a second glance as they shuffled past into Lily's immaculately kept room, off limits to the likes of me. The door clicked shut, and the muffled bursts of teenage giggles were like needles to my chest. I retreated to the kitchen, sinking against the fridge as tears betrayed my resolve not to let this break me. I was her mother, not some dismissed servant in my own home. That evening, I confronted Tom, my voice shaking but firm. "How can you let her, our daughter, treat me like this? Today, she called me the housekeeper. In our home." Tom didn't look up from his paper. "Maybe if you didn't look the part, she'd respect you more. You're always cleaning, always in those rags. What do you expect? His words stung, slicing through whatever defenses I had left. I'm trying, Tom. I'm trying to make this a home. But you and your parents, you're teaching her to hate me. He scoffed, folding his newspaper with precision. Alice, you need to stop being so sensitive. She's growing up in a different world than you did. She needs to fit in. Nights turned restless, my thoughts spiraling. Tom's distancing, the casual cruelty of his parents, and now Lily's rejection painted a stark picture. I was an outsider in my own life. My role diminished to that of a silent provider, unseen and unappreciated. As I watched Lily grow into a teenager, her embarrassment of me became more pronounced. Her comments about my outdated clothes and simple manners cut deeper because they echoed Tom's words. She was ashamed to be seen with me, her mother, who had sacrificed everything only to be rendered invisible. Turning 37 wasn't supposed to be a milestone, but I had hoped it would be a turning point for something better, something kinder. With a heart full of tentative hope, I'd booked a table at a nice restaurant downtown. It was a small celebration, just me, Tom, and Lily. Nothing fancy, but something to maybe, just maybe, bring us back together for a night. I got home from work, my spirits buoyed by the thought of a quiet dinner with my family. The apartment was quiet when I walked in, too quiet. Tom and Lily were sitting in the living room, their faces turned towards the TV, looking like they were braced for bad news. "Hey, I got a surprise," I said. I'd booked us a table at Marcelo's for dinner to celebrate my birthday, just the three of us. My voice was bright, forcing cheerfulness into the edges of my exhaustion. Tom turned off the TV and looked at me, an eyebrow raised, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Alice, seriously, you think we want to go out and celebrate with you? A dropout? What would we even talk about?" Tom's words were casual, but they cut deep, his smirk turning into a sneer. "Yeah, Mom, it's kind of embarrassing. You wouldn't even know which fork to use," Lily added, her words echoing her father's disdain. I felt my face flush, the sting of their words like a slap. "I just thought we could be a family for tonight," I said. Tom laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "A family with you making a fool of yourself? No thanks. Actually, here's my gift to you." He stood up, walked over to his briefcase, and pulled out an envelope, tossing it onto the coffee table with a dramatic flourish. Confused, I picked it up, my hands trembling. It was a divorce application. This is your gift." "Yeah. Consider yourself free from us. We're done, Alice. I'm taking Lily, and we're moving out. You can keep this place," he said, his words cold and calculated. Lily just nodded, standing up to join her father. "I'd rather live with Dad. I can't be seen with you, Mom. It's just too embarrassing." They packed up their things with chilling efficiency. I watched, frozen, as my world was dismantled piece by piece. Not just the physical pieces of our lives, but the last vestiges of any affection, any pretense of a relationship. They left without a goodbye, the door closing with a soft click that echoed like a gunshot in the empty apartment. The divorce proceedings were quick, clinical, and brutal. Tom's parents testified about my inadequacies, painting me as an uneducated, unfit mother in stark, unforgiving strokes. Even Lily spoke, her voice steady, her words rehearsed. "I want to live with my dad. He's better for me." Sitting there in that sterile courtroom, listening to the litany of my supposed failures, I felt something inside me break, Or maybe it was something coming together, a realization hardening into resolve. They were all strangers. Their words were no longer capable of wounding me as they once had. I was alone, truly alone. But perhaps that was the freedom I needed. I knew one thing for sure. I needed to prove, if to no one else but myself, that I was capable of much more. That burning resolve led me back to the doors of the college I had left years ago. I enrolled again, older than most of my classmates, and with a fierceness in me that only life's hard knocks can bestow. I hired tutors, spending evenings grappling with investment theories and financial models. My eyes blurred from the strain. Social media was a minefield, though every so often, a photo of Tom, Lily, and that woman, Tom's new partner, would pop up. They looked happy, carefree, living it up in some swanky downtown apartment that screamed luxury. The sting of seeing them so blissful while I was over here piecing myself back together was sharp. But instead of letting it drag me down, I used it as fuel. Each picture, each post pushed me harder. I channeled my anger, my hurt into my studies, turning bitterness into a motivator. Graduation day came, and I was a different woman from the one who had started. You've got what it takes, Alice. Don't let anyone tell you differently, my favorite professor, Dr. Henson, told me during our final meeting. His words were a balm to the raw edges of my pride. With his recommendation, I landed a position at a respected firm, stepping into the world of finance with a determination to rise. The corporate world was another battlefield, but one I was now well equipped to navigate. I started as just another employee, but not for long. Within 3 years, I climbed from the ground floor to department head, my name on an office door, my decisions shaping the company's future. Alongside my career, I revamped my life. I traded my old battered car for something sleek and new, something that hummed under my touch like a promise. My apartment followed, from modest to modern, a high-rise with views of the city that twinkled like the stars I was reaching for. Shopping for new clothes wasn't just about style. It was about armor. Each piece, whether a sharp suit or a sleek dress, was chosen to project the new me, the competent, capable businesswoman. My hair, once always pulled back in a practical ponytail, now fell in stylish waves or was pinned up in chic designs that said I cared about every detail. Only my closest friends knew the extent of my transformation. You're doing what you were meant to do, Alice. It's like you finally found your stage. My friend Jenna told me over coffee one day, her eyes wide as she took in the changes. Yeah, I guess I have, I said, sipping my espresso. Tom and Lily and all the pain associated with them faded into the background, becoming just a part of my story, not the defining chapter. There I was, browsing job listings late one night, when I stumbled across an opening that made my heart skip a beat. A department head position at none other than the company where my ex-husband Tom worked. I applied, half out of a deep-seated need to prove myself, half out of the sheer audacity of it all. The interview was next week. I walked in with all the confidence of a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The interviewers were a panel of 3, each more impressed than the last as we discussed everything from market trends to financial strategies. By the end, they seemed genuinely excited about what I could bring to the table. Well, Alice, I must say it's refreshing to see such a clear vision and detailed knowledge. We'd be lucky to have you on board, the senior interviewer remarked, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Thank you. I'm ready to hit the ground running, I replied, my tone steady, my resolve firmer than ever. Meeting my new team and getting to know them made my first day seem like something from a movie. Until Tom's face appeared, the room was full with kind smiles and courteous applause. The look of horror on his face was enough to power the metropolis for several hours. With his mouth hanging open and eyes wide, he appeared as though he had seen a ghost. Mr. Reynolds, the company's head, appeared to find the situation humorous. Placing a hand on my shoulder, he said, "I expect everyone to give Alice all the support she needs. Our reputation is excellent, and I have no doubt that she will take this department to new heights." Tom answered in a less than courteous manner. As the room cleared, he stormed up to Mr. Reynolds, his voice low but angry. "I submitted my application for the position. For what reason did she get it? What is it that she has that I don't?" With a raised eyebrow, Mr. Reynolds looked at Tom and then at me. "Tom, merit was the only factor considered when making the decision. Alice has a far better vision for the department and far more qualifications than you have. She might impart a wealth of knowledge to you. Ask her for advice. Is this a prank of some kind? I take it?" Tom raised his voice and growled, "Tom, I'm not kidding." Mr. Reynolds responded calmly, "I suggest you change your attitude and concentrate on your own responsibilities." Tom, humiliated, did something out of the ordinary. He left after complaining about his stupid boss and tossing his ID badge on the table. Mr. Reynolds shook his head and sighed as he watched Tom leave. "I'm sorry to Alice for that. This is entirely my fault from now on. Why don't you immediately organize your team?" A tiny, satisfied smile played at the corner of my lips as I nodded and watched Tom move down the hallway. I thought his furious steps were lovely music. Later, I overheard Mr. Reynolds conversing on the phone. Yes, he did really resign. Not after this, please. I cannot recommend him in a positive light. The rest of the day went by fast with planning meetings and introductions. But all the while, one thought remained in my mind. Justice, in its own twisted way, had been served. Like most of the time, Tom had miscalculated me. But this time, I had won. Faster than I could have imagined, Tom stormed out of the office that day, and his career took a severe turn for the worse. Rumors circulated among mutual friends, excited to tell me about Tom's latest lover kicking him and Lily out of her lavish home. In despair, they were compelled to return to living with Tom's parents. I could not help but note the decline of the powerful. Lily, a college student at the time, knocked on my door during this stormy time, demanding as she had always been raised. She blew a little, quiet whistle. "Mom, you truly got better? Whoa, I suppose your decision to dump Dad was successful." She spoke in a calm tone, but there was a trace of severity that had me on edge. "What brings you here, Lily?" I asked. She entered casually and took a seat on my opulent couch as if she were the owner. "Well, I noticed that you're rich, fashionable, and smart today, and that things are a little tight at Grandpa's. Maybe I could move in here. However, clearly, I would require a sizable allowance." Upon closer inspection, I could see how much Tom had shaped her behavior. Though it had wounded me, there was no disputing the knowledge it offered. "Lily, I believe you ought to go. I will not allow myself to be used by you or anybody else in this way." Her face was full of tears, but they didn't affect me the same way they formerly had. When her pleas failed to persuade me, she burst into wrath. "You're just selfish, just like you always were," she said as she walked out, and her words sounded true in the silence of my flat. I got bits and pieces of news during the next few weeks. Tom had turned to alcohol as a way to cope with his injured ego, and Lily had moved to a new city, possibly in an effort to gain the independence she so desperately desired. Success and new beginnings became the norm for me. I got to know Michael, a colleague whose gentle disposition and quiet strength stood in stark contrast to Tom's aggressive manner. After a while, our friendship developed into love, and we were wed in a modest, joyous ceremony in front of all the people who truly loved us. I had grown stronger, wiser, and kinder as a result of the challenging route. I realized, in addition to losing a family, I had also discovered who I was, and with it, my opportunity at a fulfilling life and true love. I knew I had not only made it through, but had thrived, creating a triumph narrative that was all mine, and I felt ready for whatever lied ahead.
Sometimes, life may be really odd. I once unintentionally threw a scoop of chocolate ice cream upon someone's clothes when we were at the park. Let's just say that I go by Julie, and awkward situations seem to follow me around. I was savoring my favorite ice cream on a bright day when I stumbled across a man sitting on a bench who was engrossed in his phone. "Oh no, I'm so sorry." As soon as the ice cream hit his leg, I blurted out. He raised his head, amused rather than angry. Then he did something unexpected, like laugh. "Guess I needed a little extra chocolate today," he laughed. I felt a little less ashamed after his casual response. In a hurry, I picked up some napkins to tidy up the mess. I tried to shrug it off. "I promise I'm not usually an ice cream attacker." He grinned and waved his hand. "Sit down, it's okay," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "I'm James, and thanks to you, I've got a funny story about how my day got better." I grinned back and took a seat. "I'm Julie, and I guess I owe you an ice cream now." We clicked immediately away. James happened to work in IT, not too far from my home office where I worked on web design projects. We discussed everything from technology to movies, and by the time we were going our separate ways, we had arranged a date for the next weekend. As time went on, our relationship was going really well. That is, until the day I got to meet his mother, Mrs. Charles. Although James had said that she was a little bit traditional, nothing could have prepared me for her presence. She was sitting there with a large astrological book open when I walked into their family's house. "Hello, my name is Julie," I said, extending my hand to clasp hers. She gave me a serious once-over while obviously evaluating me, and then she gently took my hand. "James tells me you're a web designer and work from home," she remarked, sounding as though she didn't really work there. I said, feeling my face flush, "Yeah, I've been doing it for a couple of years now, and it's going really well." She merely hummed as she turned the pages of her astrology book. "And when's your birthday, dear?" She, clucking her tongue, rubbed her finger around the pages of her book, I told her. She looked unhappy and remarked, "Oh, that's a tough date. Very challenging and not astrologically compatible with my James." It wasn't easy, but I tried to remain composed. "Well, we're doing just fine so far," I replied. Mrs. Charles grinned, but not in a pleasant way. She was clearly thinking she knew better because of the way she smiled. "Oh dear, we'll see. These things have a tendency of eventually revealing their actual selves." The entire experience was stressful. I could feel her subtle jabs at my history, my work, and even my fashion sense in everything she said. It was clear that she wasn't thinking of me for James. James and I made the decision to be married after 5 years of courting, putting up with her icy demeanor, and generally navigating the ups and downs of life. Yes, it had been 5 years since the incident involving the ice cream, but nothing truly could topple us. James turned to me one lazy Friday when we were watching old comedies on the couch. His eyes were serious, which was unusual for him. He said, "Julie, I've been thinking," and my stomach gave me that strange butterfly-like flip. "What's up?" My heart was beating, but I tried to seem casual as I asked, "I Kind of wish we could watch awful movies together for the rest of our lives. Shall we officially declare it now? It wasn't like him at all. His smile was modest but eager. I chuckled, largely in relief, since this was what I had been dying to have. Are you asking me to marry you without a ring, James Charles? I am, he smiled. Damn right. But I promise I'll get you a ring that'll make up for this lame proposal. When he held me, I had the impression that everything was perfect. But organizing the wedding was a completely different affair, particularly because Mrs. Charles insisted on her viewpoint at every opportunity. We were choosing up wedding invites one evening, and of course she was there, watching me closely like a hawk. Looking at the floral pattern James and I had selected, she scowled and said, "You're not seriously considering this design, are you?" "It's far too girly." "It's what we want, Mom." James remarked, "I like it too." Always sticking up for me. To be more firm than anything else, I added extra. I refused to give in to her influence over every choice we made. "It's your wedding," she groaned, obviously not feeling well. "But remember, the invitation sets the tone for the whole event." The big day arrived sooner than I thought. Despite Mrs. Charles's persistent meddling, everything was flawless, beautiful even. James looked stunning, and his smile said it all as I approached him down the aisle. Our marriage ceremony took place outside behind a large ancient oak tree. The celebrant, Henry, was a close friend of James's who had gotten to know us both well beyond our marriage. "Do you, Julie, accept James as your legally wedded spouse, to be had and maintained from this day on, for better or worse, richer or worse, in health or illness, till death do you part? And from this day forward, for better or worse, richer or worse, sick or well, until death do you part? Do you, James, accept Julie as your legally wedded wife, to have and to hold?" We exchanged rings, and when James slid the ring onto my finger, it felt like we had triumphed over everything that life had thrown at us, including the stress of wedding planning and Mrs. Charles's remarks. Henry remarked, "You may now kiss the bride," and James didn't hesitate to do so. Everyone cheered when he planted a kiss on me. It was real in our moment, so it felt even better than a scene from a movie. After 3 years of cohabitation, everything seemed to be going well, but purchasing our own house was a significant move. Our weekends were spent viewing properties, talking about our preferences, and calculating our budget. We discovered a house one bright Monday that met nearly all of our requirements. It had a large kitchen and a large backyard. It was gorgeous. The sole issue? There was a lakeside pool there. I'd confided in James about my phobia of the water, which dates back to my childhood near-drowning experience. I haven't been near a lake or even bathtub pools since. James, though, bless him, cherished every other aspect of the house. "Listen, Julie, I know it has a lake pool, but bear with me." While we inspected the house, James tried to allay my concerns by saying, "Everything else is perfect, and we're getting it at a great price." While contemplating, I bit my lip. The price of the house was almost too wonderful to refuse, and it was very gorgeous. "All right, James, but I'm not going near that lake pool. You are aware of that, correct?" James put his arm around me and drew me in. "Naturally, sweetie. We'll work things out. We could add to it or something later on. We're not required to use it at this time. It was like a dream come true when we moved here." Although the neighborhood and the house felt ideal, Mrs. Charles soon stopped over to check out our new home. I prepared myself for her typical remarks. She was continually finding a way to express her dissatisfaction, particularly with regard to money and my work. Her lips tight, her gaze taking in every detail, she strolled around our living room. At last, she spoke something, her voice full of uncertainty. "Isn't that a big house? It must have been expensive. Are you certain you can handle the mortgage, James? James, the ever-calm mediator, attempted to diffuse the situation. We've got this under control, Mom. Julie and I took turns helping out around the house. It's not solely my fault, I added, fed up with the notion that James was depending on me. You're correct, Mrs. Charles. You know that I work too. This place is ours, and my web design job helped us get it. It pays well. She snorted, obviously not buying my story. Are you spending all day on your computer at home? It doesn't seem like it makes enough money to support a facility like this. Not at all like a real job, more like a pastime. Her visit continued in a whirl of forced smiles and awkward subject shifts. I finally let out a deep breath that I had been holding till she finally departed. James pulled me in with a hard hug. Julie, ignore her. The reality is known to us. What counts is that we're doing this together. As weeks went by, our new house started to feel like home. I set up my office and it became my safe space. From there, I worked on web design projects that not only paid well, but also showed that I could contribute just as much to our life together. James took care of the yard and kept up with the lake pool, even though I never went near it. Then, one sunny afternoon, the incident happened. Mrs. Charles had decided to drop by, supposedly to bring some of James's old stuff from his childhood. But I knew she had more on her mind. She always had a way of turning a simple gesture into something more critical. We were out in the backyard, making small talk, when her eyes landed on the lake pool. Julie, I never see you or James in that lake pool. Don't you ever swim? Her question caught me off guard. I took a deep breath, figuring honesty might stop the conversation from going further. Actually, I'm afraid of water. I had a bad experience as a kid, almost drowned. I haven't felt comfortable around lake pools or large bodies of water since. Her expression changed from curiosity to something different. I couldn't quite figure out what it meant. Was it disbelief? Disdain? Whatever it was, it didn't feel supportive. Well, that's just unusual, isn't it? A grown woman afraid of a little water? She scoffed. I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I tried to laugh it off, but the conversation left me feeling uneasy. Later I found out it wasn't just an awkward moment. It was the start of rumors. Mrs. Charles, in her usual way, had shared my fear of water with her friends and family. But she had twisted the story. By the time it made its way back to me, the story was that I was mentally unstable because of my phobia. A friend who'd heard the rumor asked me, Julie, is it true what they're saying? That you're too scared to even look at your own lake pool? I felt hurt and betrayed, so I talked to James about it. He was just as surprised. She said that? That's it. I'm talking to her. This has to stop. James confronted his mother and things exploded. He made it clear her behavior was out of line, but instead of backing down, Mrs. Charles got even worse. She started accusing me of manipulating James and trying to keep him away from her. One afternoon, she called me directly, her voice sharp and accusing. You're just trying to keep me out of the house. What are you hiding, Julie? Meeting someone else while my son's at work? Her words were like poison, meant to hurt me. I was stunned. Mrs. Charles, that's ridiculous. I would never cheat on James. You know that. But she wouldn't listen. Oh, I know your type. You think you're clever, but I know what's going on. I told James about the call, and he was just as shocked. She said that? That's insane, Julie. You know it's not true, and I know it's not true, he said, trying to laugh it off. But I was shaken. The fact that his own mother would go so far to make me look bad was disturbing. James agreed, and we decided it was time to set some boundaries. After that, Mrs. Charles's visits became less frequent, and when she did come over, James made sure to be there so he could step in if needed. Things started to settle down, but a few weeks after the big blow-up with her, I began noticing small things that seemed off, little things that wouldn't mean much to anyone else, but to me, they felt like signs. It started with the feeling of being watched at first. I thought I was just imagining it when I was at the grocery store picking out vegetables. I got this strange feeling like someone was staring at me. I turned around and sometimes caught a glimpse of someone looking away quickly. I told myself it was nothing, probably just other shoppers. But then it happened again, this time at the laundromat. I was folding clothes when that same feeling came over me. I glanced up and saw a man standing across the street, just staring straight at me. I blinked, and he was gone. "You're being paranoid, Julie," I muttered to myself as I shoved the clothes into my bag. But the real shock came one evening at home. James was working late, and I was in the living room catching up on some web design work. That feeling of being watched hit me again. I peeked out the window, and there he was, the same man from the laundromat. He was standing across the street, barely visible in the dim streetlight, but definitely there, definitely watching. I grabbed my phone and called James, my voice a bit shaky. "James, I think someone's been following me. I've seen him a few times now." James stayed calm, maybe too calm. "Julie, love, you're probably just tired. You've been working a lot lately. Maybe you should take a break." I tried to believe him, thinking maybe it was all in my head. I started doing yoga and tried meditation to calm down, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. I just couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched. Then it happened again. I was leaving the grocery store, and there he was, standing in the parking lot. This time I was ready. I quickly pulled out my phone and snapped a picture before he could walk away. Finally, I had proof. This wasn't just my imagination. That evening, I showed the photo to James. I could tell he finally understood. "Okay, that's not normal," he admitted. Later that night, we were walking home from a nearby restaurant when James suddenly grabbed the arm of a man passing by. It was him, the man from the photo. "Why are you following my wife?" James's voice was tense, and he held the man's arm tightly. The guy looked cornered, his eyes darting around before he let out a sigh. "Look, I'm a private investigator. I was hired to watch her, that's all." James's face darkened. "Hired by who?" "Your mother," the investigator confessed, looking embarrassed. "She wanted proof of infidelity." James was enraged. That very moment he took out his phone and dialed his mother. "What the hell, Mom? Have you employed someone to trail Julie? And that's it. Until you behave like a respectable human being, you will no longer be in our life." By the time the heated debate ended, James was shaking with rage. He apologized to me several times on the way home. James went out the following day and purchased cameras for every area of our property. "As soon as he installs them, nobody will violate our privacy in the same way again," he pledged. James proposed that we take a trip to decompress after everything that had happened. "Julie, let's just go away from this whole situation." One evening, as we sat on the couch fatigued in a house that now felt too loud with all the strain, he murmured, "Just you and me, somewhere peaceful." I didn't require persuasion. "Yes, let's do it." I had to take a break badly. A tiny home in the mountains, far from everything and everyone, was the choice James and I made. It was flawless. There were no distractions. It was just the two of us, the fresh air and stunning views. There, amid the stillness of nature, I felt all my worry dissipating. We hiked during the day and cuddled up by the fire in the evenings. It was a relief to be able to laugh, breathe, and be myself without any worries. I was beaming when we got home, not just from the mountain sunshine, but also from a fresh sense of happiness. I had a baby. A few weeks after our return, we learned, and while it made us happy, it also made me a little nervous. I didn't want Mrs. Charles to know yet, in particular. We had been waiting so long for this little miracle, and I was worried that the stress she could bring would damage it. It was simple to keep the pregnancy a secret when I worked from home. The doctor remarked that although my tummy remained tiny and I didn't go out much, it was a bit odd and nothing to be concerned about. He told us during one of my visits that every pregnancy is unique. It got tougher to hide my condition as my 9th month drew near. It was finally time, James and I decided, to break the news. We invited all of our family members to a little party we had planned at our house, akin to a baby shower. I still thought it was appropriate to invite Mrs. Charles in spite of everything that had transpired. I inhaled deeply and called her number, my heart pounding. Before she answered, the phone rang 5 times. "Hello? Hello? This is Julie," I said, attempting to maintain a calm tone. "I had some news to share. James and I are going to have a child. We would love to have you join us for a small celebration that we are holding next week." There was a long silence, so long that I thought maybe I had said something wrong. Then, in an unexpectedly serene voice, she added, "I'll be there." When the celebration day finally arrived, our house was a flurry of laughing and excitement. Speculating about the gender of the baby, our family fretted about baby outfits. I interacted with the guests while feeling our baby's soft kicks with my palm, frequently resting on my tiny tummy. Everything was good until the arrival of Mrs. Charles, my worst nightmare. She remained quiet much of the afternoon, muttering to anybody who would listen that my pregnancy wasn't real. "Observe her," she remarked sarcastically. "She's barely visible and 9 months pregnant. She's fabricating this whole thing to trick my son and steal his money." Fortunately, there was little impact from her remarks. The visitors, aware of her past of persistent dislike towards me, rolled their eyes and laughed. They wrote off her charges as simply another of her irrational tales. Mrs. Charles, though, continued on. She stomped out, muttering fiercely, "I'll prove it to all of you." Her face was flushed, either from embarrassment or fury. Filled with a mixture of fury and resolve to put a stop to this absurdity, I trailed behind her to the courtyard beside the lake pool. "Maybe we just have a conversation." "You know that this isn't true," I begged, managing to remain composed despite the tumultuous emotions roiling within of me. Anger twisted her face. "Preserve it." "I am fully aware of your intentions," she sternly stated. I was about to give up on persuading her when I felt a strong shove from behind. I tripped and staggered forward. As the lake's edge drew nearer, I found myself slipping into the water without realizing it. I started to sink and felt the same dread that had gripped me as a child. Fear. As I strained, with my mind screaming for aid, darkness began to creep into my vision. I woke up in a hospital bed with the sound of machinery beeping softly all around me. James stood there, holding my hand tightly, his face pallid and anxious. "How's the baby?" I stammered, speaking hardly audible above a whisper. James gave me a tight grip, tears welling up in his eyes. The doctors were forced to perform an urgent delivery. "He's currently receiving intensive care," he muttered, his voice trembling with terror. Tears began to fill up in my eyes as my heart fell. In an incubator, our infant, our tiny guy, was fighting for his life. I woke up the following morning still in disbelief. My thoughts were stuck in a horrible cycle, replaying everything that had happened the night before. I turned to James, feeling weak but desperate to find out what had truly happened. "You need to check the security footage from last night," I said, turning to face James in a trembling but urgent voice. "I got shoved into the lake pool by your mom. It was not a mishap." James appeared perplexed and nearly unwilling to accept it. "Are you sure, Julie? Although Mom can be strict, pushing you physically? That sounds nothing like her." With my stomach in knots, I begged him to just check the cameras, fearing he wouldn't take me seriously. With a cautious nod, James took out his laptop to view the security footage that our installed camera had captured. As he sped through the footage, there was a lot of tension in the room. His expression went from uncertainty to shock to terror as the reality was revealed on TV. "I'm so sorry, Julie. Oh my God." He stared at me, his face pallid, and he muttered, "I can't believe she did this." He phoned the police right away, leaving the laptop by his side. The evidence was indisputable, and his mother was promptly taken into custody. The trial was scheduled after Mrs. Charles was charged. "It was all a joke," she said in defense, a means to show that I was lying about being pregnant. She said she believed my tummy was a fake, and that when I entered the water, it would fall off, making my lie obvious to everyone. The witness accounts and the footage, however, painted a different picture. The jurors rejected her explanation of a mishandled practical joke. She was found guilty of reckless endangerment and assault. She received a 2-year prison sentence from the court, who delivered a harsh ruling. He also mandated that she reimburse us for our medical expenses and our baby's rehabilitation because our son was born prematurely as a result of the shock of the event. Mrs. Charles was forced to liquidate her home in order to pay the fines and compensation. The strain on us was enormous as our kid battled through his early months, receiving numerous medical procedures and therapy to catch up in his development. There were therapy sessions, hospital visits, and nonstop anxiety every day. But with constant attention and medical assistance, our young boy eventually started to flourish. I got closer to James through it all. Our relationship was only made stronger by the difficulties we encountered, and we experienced unanticipated growth in our love for our kid and each other. In order to ensure the safety of our family, I made a crucial choice as Mrs. Charles's release date approached. I was successful in getting a restraining order against her. She was prohibited from communicating in any way with us, particularly with our son. Though not an easy choice, it was one that had to be made. The most crucial thing in our lives was keeping our child safe, and we couldn't take any more chances with our well-being. One night, when we had put our son to bed, James gave me a kind grin. "You know, I feel fortunate in spite of everything. We have him, we have each other, and we have the future. Not only did it mark the close of a trying chapter in our lives, but it also signaled the beginning of a happy, healing, and hopeful one."
I'm Luna, and I'm 35 years old. My spouse, Mason, is 3 years my senior, and we were married 6 years ago. My dear father died of a disease and left me with a sizable inheritance, which drastically altered my life. I bought a new house with my bequest, which I treasure very much. This house has a comfortable aroma of freshly cut wood, and I can't help but think how happy my father would be to see it. My father used to live alone in our previous home, which was only 10 minutes' walk from our apartment. My father died from a fall not long after I moved out a few years ago, following the death of my mother. I had to make the tough choice to tear down our old family home and replace it with a new one after receiving the inheritance. The happy memories we created there, even though the old house's structure is gone, I think will always be in our hearts. Mason frequently cited my father when discussing the importance of starting over with a new house. I initially believed he was attempting to console me, but that quickly proved to be untrue. Mason suddenly requested me to fill out and mail divorce papers one evening. Perplexed, I inquired about his meaning. He told me quite frankly that we were divorcing and that the new house he was having constructed with my father's money was for his mistress, who he was going to live with. I was taken aback upon discovering his adultery, in sharp contrast to how he described our relationship. He acknowledged having an affair for approximately 9 months, during which time he described his mistress as charming, caring, and truly in love with him. Mason said he would take the house as alimony, saying he had no further benefits from our 6-year marriage that had produced children, and that he always hated returning home to me. I went to Mason for solace since I was upset, but he gave me the finger instead. He said that my behavior influenced him to have an affair and ultimately decide to leave, and he held me accountable for his actions. He called it my alimony and gave me an envelope containing $12,000, telling me to be thankful since he was about to move into the new house. Feeling both overwhelmed and composed at the same time, I gave the envelope back to him and declined the money. Constructed with memories and inheritance in mind, the mansion was intended to be a haven, but it was now the focus of a devastating discovery. I said unequivocally, "If you no longer love me, there's no reason for us to stay married." And I consented to the divorce. I don't require cash. Mason expressed amazement at how easily I came to terms with our marriage's dissolution. He acknowledged and said, "Well, if you say so, just don't ask for it back later." He packed up his things and departed a few days later, taking the keys to our freshly constructed home with him. But soon after he moved out, Mason contacted me hysterically, his voice strained with fear. "What actions did you take?" When the police arrived at the house, they discussed trespassing charges and warrants. "What is happening?" He claimed that while he was with his lover, the cops had broken in and demanded to know if they knew it was lawful to do what they were doing. "You entered this residence using a stolen key, which is theft and trespassing, which is why we are here. Are you aware of that?" The cops said. Shaken and disoriented, Mason turned to face his lover, who looked at him with equal confusion. "This is your home, right?" she muttered. "You mentioned that you wanted to show me." He angrily yelled, "Be quiet and stay out of this," to which one cop cut him off. "Sorry to disrupt, but we need to handle this at the station." Mason called me desperate, caught between his woman and the police. "Why is this occurring right now? How did you act?" Calmly, "I haven't done much," was my response. "I just reported that there were strangers in my house and that my house keys were stolen. It makes sense to contact the police." I had already reported the incident, reverted to my maiden name Luna, and filed the divorce papers. "This is my home, Mason," I firmly stated as I went on. "Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony?" "I never consented to that," he disagreed. "You may easily manipulate events to support your story." "Are you kidding? How on earth do you think you own that house?" "The person on the house contract is me. I own the land and I paid for it with my father's inheritance," I declared categorically. Mason said, "But your father said it was for us. You were my husband at the time. Now that we are divorced, we hardly know one another. Why do you believe that this is your land?" I snapped back. "When he became sick, my father made the sensible decision to give me the land rights in order to avoid any issues in the event that something occurred to him. Maybe he anticipated something similar, which is why he suggested tearing down the old house and erecting a new one. I could see more clearly than ever before that property and money might readily turn into sources of conflict." Mason's ordinarily composed manner began to make sense to me after I agreed to the divorce. I thought, "So you planned this all along?" "I did nothing wrong," he shot back, sounding defensive. "From the beginning, you have misinterpreted every detail." Seeing him so naive and believing he would be content with his mistress was almost comical. "Stop being so silly," I shot back. "You hold me responsible for the divorce, the affair, and the house's loss." Now that you're caught between your fiancé and the authorities, how does that feel? Mason, obviously unhappy with the turn of events, could only moan in response. Hating me is the wrong path. Your whole mess is what you're doing. Do you know the saying, you reap what you sow? You deserve this. Mason lost control of his temper at that point and started yelling accusations into the phone. But all of a sudden, he was cut off. Excuse me, are you the former wife of Mr. Gold? He's making a mess at your place. Please, might we have a word? The call had been taken over by a policeman. After giving the officer a brief explanation of the circumstances, she expressed empathy for how challenging this must have been for me. Mason was later brought to the police station along with his mistress. Mason argued that it wasn't trespassing because the house was a gift from me. With genuine surprise, his mistress admitted that she was unaware that they were intruding. Mason attempted to bolster his allegations at the station with purported evidence, but in the end, the mistress's account was deemed reliable, and she was just given a warning before being released. However, Mason was fined after being found guilty of trespassing and larceny. Then it came up that, upon his release, Mason had named me as his guarantor, presumably so his controlling parents wouldn't know. The officer gave me this information, obviously frustrated. Why should I act as his surety? Now that we're divorced and essentially strangers, I firmly replied. I decline because I no longer have any relationship with Mr. Gold. His parents live close by. Kindly get in touch with them. The officer informed Mason, who was visibly frustrated. His parents, who were already aware of our divorce, due to his infidelity, were not yet informed of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had brought them fully up to speed on the situation. Reluctantly, after his parents requested more details, I visited Mason's parents' house. When I knocked on the door and started to explain, his mother immediately cut me off. No need to apologize, she said. It's all my foolish son's fault. But did you know about this? I inquired. Well, my son is here with his mistress, a much younger woman, she revealed. We allowed them into the living room to discuss the situation. To my astonishment, Mason had brought his mistress along, creating a tense atmosphere. The living room scene unfolded with Mason, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Russell. Russell, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay. I greeted them. Luna, thanks for coming, Russell responded. I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Mason's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side? I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Mason and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. What were you thinking? Trying to take Luna's new house? Are you insane? Russell demanded of Mason. It's not that simple, Mason interjected. How is that even possible? Russell retorted, clearly frustrated. Your story is completely different from hers. Apparently, Mason had spun his version of events before I arrived. What were you told? I asked. Russell explained. He claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest. Really? He said that. I was incredulous. It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object, but that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership to him. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it is beyond comprehension. I'm so sorry, Luna, for having such a son. Mason's mother apologized. What are you saying, Mom? Mason argued. I'm telling the truth. Luna wasn't agreeing. She was too stunned to speak. I nodded in agreement with Russell. Despite everything, Mason continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied. How can you say that? Were you spending a lot on her? Mason asked, gesturing towards his mistress. No, why would you think that? I responded. Right after our divorce, I happened to run into one of your colleagues. When I mentioned the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling. I continued. Mason's college had looked uncomfortable during our conversation. No offense, but I thought it might happen. The colleague had said, What do you mean? Didn't he tell you? I asked, the colleague shifting uncomfortably. The colleague finally spilled everything, revealing details that I should have known sooner. I wasn't initially aware of the full extent of Mason's actions, but a conversation with one of his colleagues soon brought everything to light. Mason had been openly bragging about his mistress, a woman 15 years his junior, lavishing her with expensive bags and jewelry. He boasted about his plans, even sharing that he intended to divorce me to marry his mistress, capitalizing on her recent inheritance from her deceased father to build a new house. He said, Once the house is built, I'll divorce Luna and somehow claim it. No matter the opposition, I'll get it. Then my young new wife and I will live in the big house. The colleague recounted, it seemed the house built with my father's inheritance was not just a home, but a grand gesture intended for his proposal to her. Hearing this, I confronted Mason. I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong? I asked, my frustration evident. Mason, visibly flustered, attempted to justify his actions. Well, yes. I bought her gifts. So what? I used my own money and gave Luna her living expenses. She's not my destined partner. This woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage. His parents, present during this confession, reacted with shock. However, the most astonishing response came from the mistress herself. Mary, did I ever say that we were even dating? She declared. What do you mean? Mason asked, bewildered. Exactly that, she replied firmly. I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that kind of arrangement, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now what are you talking about? That's creepy, she stated. Mason went pale, stunned by her revelation. At that point, I asked her, So why did you come here with him today? The mistress explained, I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it was an affair, and I was prepared to pay the alimony. But I'm still a student. A student? How old are you? Russell, Mason's father, interjected, looking bewildered. I lost my parents early and have been engaging in sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses, she confessed. This revelation turned the entire room silent, leaving everyone to digest the depth of deception and the surprising turn of events. As the discussion unfolded, the mistress clarified her financial situation, indicating she didn't have savings to immediately start paying the alimony. I've just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary, she explained. So you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony? I asked. Yes, that's right, she confirmed. Mason, who had been silently listening, suddenly erupted in anger. Didn't you hear her? Unfortunately, she never intended to marry or even date you. But that's separate from the alimony you owe, I pointed out, trying to steer the conversation back to the matter at hand. What about saying you wanted a house? Mason challenged the mistress. I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you, she replied, clarifying her intentions. Mason exclaimed in disbelief. I was suddenly taken to that house, thinking it was yours. Then the police came, and I learned it was your wife's. The mistress bowed deeply to me, indicating her respect and acknowledging that all of this confusion was spurred by Mason's misunderstandings. All right, I said, seeing an opportunity to resolve at least one issue. If you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment. But promise me no more sugar dating. It might not end simply next time. I promise I'll never do it again, she said earnestly. Turning to Mason, I addressed the financial aspects of our separation. Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay. Alimony? What are you talking about? Mason asked, taken aback and not expecting to pay alimony himself. You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money, I reminded him. I gave you $122,000, and now you're asking for more. That's not what we agreed on. Mason protested. I don't recall any agreement. I replied, you returned the $122,000 I gave you, saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $30,000, I clarified. And you're also at fault for not having children in the 6 years we were married. Mason suddenly accused, changing the subject. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. Someone asked, What are you doing, Mason? He held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. Are you serious? Do you think her inability to have children is her fault? I asked, incredulous at his audacity. Enough with jokes, Dad. Mason's father interrupted, turning to him. Don't tell me you're blaming Luna for your affair, too. Mason stubbornly stated, Well, that's how it is. I shouldn't have tied the knot with her. It resembles fraud. How on earth did you think that? I put him to the test. Your parents desired to have grandchildren. They decided it would be best to separate if she was unable to conceive. I chose her for that reason. Mason's father remarked, looking plainly upset. We must have raised you incorrectly if you really think that. Your mother waited 8 years to become pregnant. Before Mason was born, Deborah, Mason's mother, had to go through 8 arduous years of intensive reproductive treatments. Observing others have a simple time starting children while she battled caused her great stress and sadness. Tears were now streaming down her cheeks as she listened to the drama play out, a silent witness to the grief her son's actions had brought back. Russell, Mason's father, finally said, Leave this house now, clearly disappointed. Mason posed the obvious question, Why? Russell replied, You're a long-awaited son, and I can't bear to look at you now. His voice was laden with anguish. Remain away until you have a true understanding of your mistakes. But where ought I to go? Mason questioned, a hint of desperation in his tone. Go back to our apartment, I said. We've already canceled that flat. It was unnecessary to keep with the new house. I immediately canceled it after calling the police. There is nowhere for you to go back to. Mason realized he had nowhere to go and was clearly shaken. He attributed his mistress's actions to his frustration. You are to blame. You now claim you never meant to marry me, even though all the money has been spent. It is a scam, she answered calmly, saying, I was upfront about it being a sugar relationship. I never made gift or money requests. feel free to file a lawsuit. But don't forget about the alimony. I have documentation of our agreement," I added, observing Mason become agitated. He stumbled and said, "Wait, please wait." I ignored his request and called his parents to let them know what was going on before leaving their home. Later, after learning Mason no longer resided at his parents' home, I retained legal counsel and issued a demand letter for alimony. I ensured that it wasn't delivered there. The receptionist at his place of employment questioned, perplexed as she studied the letter, "Why is it being sent here?" "Sending such documents to residential and employment addresses is feasible," I clarified. "Is this what this is about?" she asked, observing Mason's pallid, trembling appearance. "Yes," I said. "I simply stated the facts. I was not requested to be silent. It is his own fault." The demand letter that Mason's employer received immediately became public knowledge of his activities, including his engagement in sugar dating. His professional reputation took a hit as this revelation caused a larger conversation among his peers. Mason made the decision to go from his position, stating that he was departing on his terms, following a string of humiliating defeats and being unable to handle the rumors and murmurs. His troubles didn't end there. Feeling that he was a victim of marital fraud, he sought for free legal help. The legal advisor was not supportive, though. The advisor said, "We have seen cases similar to yours, but based on the evidence you have provided, this isn't considered fraud. At first, you consented to a sugar daddy relationship. If you later felt something, that was entirely your fault. If you want to sue, you can, but it will probably be a financial waste." Mason made the decision to drop the lawsuit after taking the advice. He'd eventually confided in me, feeling dejected and regretting his previous actions. I'm not sure what I was contemplating. I had no idea how important you were, even after 6 years of dating. He begged sincerely, "I swear I'll make you happy this time and won't let myself be distracted by others." He begged me, but I was unmoved. I made a clear decision. "I decline," I retorted firmly. "Why?" Following so much pleading. He did not give up. I had realized during those 6 years that Mason was not a good person. He tried to take what was rightfully mine, put all the blame on me, and then came back brazenly when he had lost everything, expecting to make amends. "Why would I want to be back with someone who is so self-centered?" I inquired. "You don't have to put it that way," said Mason. "The same things you said to me once." Still, I was determined. Knowing his current situation, I firmly said, "Never contact me again." After that, I hung up, erased all of his contact details, and modified my phone number. A few days later, something unanticipated happened. I was told by one of the neighbors, "Your ex-husband came to the house the other day. He made a disturbance, so we had to chase him away." What did he have in mind? Shocked, I pondered out loud. To scare him off, the local ladies, who were aware of the circumstances, had even feigned to call the police. I haven't seen him since, so I don't know where he is or what his circumstances are right now. However, I have no doubt that he is not living a happy life.